They thought the husky was mimicking their daughter. He was trying to reach her. The way a Siberian husky vocalizes is one of the reasons people either love or avoid the breed. It is not barking. It is something older than barking, a sound that carries across distances that have nothing to do with the distances inside an American home. Storm had been with the Castellano family for 3 years, and they had made their peace with his voice. He used it freely. When he was hungry, when the mail arrived, when something on television sounded like another dog. He was a communicative animal, and they had accepted this the way you accept a person's accent. So when Storm began vocalizing every time their daughter Ivy cried, they laughed. The first time. The second time they had a theory. He was mimicking her. Huskies do this. They hear a sound, and they return a version of it. It made sense. It was charming even. Their toddler daughter crying, and their 60-pound husky sitting in front of her making a sound that was... They couldn't explain this part. Not quite mimicry, not quite comfort. Something that sat between those two things in a register they didn't have a word for. Ivy was 3 years old. She was small for her age, blonde-haired, loud when she was happy. When she cried, it came without warning and without obvious cause. Not tantrums exactly, something more like distress that arrived before she had language for it. Rhea, their mother, worked in early childhood education. He had a good instinct for the difference between a developmental tantrum and something else. She had been sitting with the feeling that Ivy's crying was something else for about 4 months. She had not said this to her husband Paolo, because she could not say it without evidence. Storm was giving her evidence. She just hadn't looked at it directly yet. On the 8th day, Storm did something new. Ivy began to cry in the living room, that same arriving from nowhere distress, and Storm came from the kitchen at a speed that was not casual. He sat down in front of her, close, 12 inches from her face. He made his sound, that between sound, not aimed at the room but at her specifically. Then he did something Rhea had never seen him do. He lifted his right paw and placed it on Ivy's left knee, gently, carefully, the way an animal places a paw when it is not pawing but touching. Ivy stopped crying, immediately, not gradually, immediately. She looked at Storm with the full attention of a child who has been reached. Rhea stood in the hallway doorway and felt something settle into place in her chest that had been floating loose for months. If you stay for stories about what animals perceive before we do, subscribe right now, because what comes next is the part that changed everything for this family. She made the appointment the next morning, not with their pediatrician, with an audiologist, Dr. Sasha Mirand, at the Children's Hospital 20 minutes from their house. She described the crying to the intake nurse and checked the box that said, behavioral concern. She did not yet have words for, my dog is doing something that makes me think my daughter is hearing the world differently than the rest of us. The audiological assessment took most of a Tuesday morning. Ivy wore small headphones and pressed a button when she heard tones, and did not press it when she did not hear them. Dr. Mirren administered the test twice. She stepped out of the booth after the second assessment and spoke to Paolo first because he was nearest. She said, your daughter has moderate bilateral hearing loss in the higher frequency range. It appears to have been present since birth. She is not hearing everything that's in the room with her. Paolo sat down on the floor of the audiology clinic. He said, how has nobody caught this before? Dr. Mirren said, in children with moderate loss rather than profound, and in children who are verbal and socially engaged, it is one of the most commonly missed early diagnoses we see. They adapt. They read lips without knowing they're reading lips. They fill in sounds from context. The crying without apparent cause is very common. They're reacting to a sensory gap they cannot explain and don't yet have language for. Paolo looked at the floor for a while. Then he said, our dog knew. Has your dog ever done something that made you realize it was reading something you couldn't see? Drop your story below. These deserve to be heard. A Siberian Husky's hearing range extends from approximately 40 Hz to 65,000 Hz. A human's hearing range covers 20 Hz to 20,000 Hz. Storm had been living with a child whose auditory world was narrower than his by a factor no one had calculated. He had been hearing the difference between the sounds Ivy responded to and the sounds she did not. He had been watching a 3-year-old navigate a room full of sounds she was receiving incompletely and crying regularly from the frustration of a world that kept arriving wrong. When he made his sound in front of her, that between sound, not bark, not whine, he was doing something that operated in frequencies she could access, frequencies her compromised hearing could reach. When he placed his paw on her knee, he was speaking in a channel her senses could receive. Touch. She stopped crying because something had finally reached her. Every guardian deserves to be seen, even the ones who never asked for anything in return. Subscribe, so you never miss the next one. Ivy got her hearing aids on a Thursday morning. Small, flesh-colored, the technology so compact it barely showed. She walked into the parking lot with Rhea and Paolo and stopped walking. She stood on the pavement and turned her head left, then right, then left again. There was traffic on the road at the edge of the parking lot, wind in the small ornamental trees at the entrance to the clinic, a child somewhere out of sight calling to someone. She heard all of it. She looked up at her mother with an expression that had no name in a 3-year-old's face, something between discovery and overwhelm. And she said quiet, "That's loud." Storm met them at the door when they came home. Ivy crouched down in the hallway, both hands on his face. He made his sound. She laughed. The full sound of her laugh went into the room, and Storm's ears swiveled toward it, both of them, at the same moment. He had been listening to her all along.